Welcome to the first episode of the Weekly Roundup. We have a pretty jam-packed episode today. I can't guarantee they're all going to be this long, but wanted to go all out for our first episode. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into it. First thing I want to talk about is Trump's organizations being indicted. His company and an entity called Trump Payroll Corporation were charged with 10 counts of different tax evasion, conspiracy, criminal tax fraud, different charges like that. And one of Trump's really deputies in his companies, Weisselberg, I think is how you say it, he was charged with 15 felony counts in connection with an alleged scheme stretching back to as far as 2005. They were charged specifically with a scheme to defraud, conspiracy, criminal tax fraud, and falsifying business records. Weisselberg was also charged with grand larceny, there we go, and offering a false instrument for filing. Now, this is the first set of charges in an ongoing investigation into Trump and his companies and organizations. Some of the benefits Weisselberg received from the company were a Upper West Side apartment, a pair of Mercedes-Benz cars for him and his wife, and a private school tuition for two of his grandchildren. So they estimate he evaded a total of $1.76 million in income, or he evaded taxes on $1.76 million in income beginning in 2005. And he also concealed for years that he was a resident of New York City, causing him to avoid paying city income taxes. Prosecutors have alleged that he evaded a total of more than $900,000 in federal, state, and city taxes during the period, and received a total of $133,124 in state tax refunds, to which he is not entitled. And so some of the perks received by him were $359,000 in tuition expenses for his two grandchildren, and Rebecca Risigliano is how I'm going to say it. There's a lot of weird names in the story. Is a former New York federal prosecutor, and she said that her take on this case was that it reads like a classic old school fraud case, and the case is designed to put enormous amounts of pressure on Weisselberg to turn in and to cooperate with investigators in their further investigation on Trump. So you kind of think of it like with mafias in the 80s, where they take out one guy and they arrest one guy and then try to get him to snitch on other parts of the mafia. So yeah, I think now, do I think that he'll actually sell out for Trump? I don't think it's that likely. He has been with Trump since the 70s, and in my mind, people who have been with Trump in the 70s and are the way he is are just so far gone that nothing is going to bring them back. Also, if I'm correct, he's pretty elderly, so any form of actual jail sentence is probably going to be pretty small just because of that. Now, the thing that got me started on this whole story was that Trump actually had a rally, and he pretty much admitted to doing all of these things, which is pretty funny because it's just continuing the classic Trump trend of saying parts and the phrases that you're not supposed to say, like, yeah, everyone does tax evasion and illegal stuff, or when he said, if every American voted, Republicans would never win another election, or saying how, America's committed a lot of atrocities too. So I'll play that clip right now.
Letting all these people, many of them, look at the people they're letting, and these people are going on the streets. There's no cash bail, there's no justice, and the people are afraid to go to our Democrat-run cities. I don't like going. They're afraid to go. Who the hell wants to go? And yet they go after good, hard-working people for not paying taxes on a company car. Company car. You didn't pay tax on the car or a company apartment. You used an apartment because you need an apartment because you have to travel too far where your house is. You didn't pay tax. Or education for your grandchildren. I don't even know. Do you have to? But does anybody know the answer to that stuff? Okay.
Jr. also pretty much admitted to doing it on Fox News. I'm not going to play that clip because, like, it's Trump Jr., like, no one really cares what he has to say. But sticking with the topic of rich people and being, and taxes, recently ProPublica released a really good article that I wanted to talk about, and the full article will be linked below, but they received tons of different tax documents for the richest Americans, and I just want to go through some of the bigger details of that. So, like, in the first thing I found was, in recent years, the median American household earned about $70,000 annually and paid 14% in federal taxes. The highest income tax rate is 37%, and that's for couples earning above $628,000. So they compared how much in taxes the 25 richest Americans paid each year to how much Forbes estimates their wealth grew in the same in the same period. And Forbes is the leading people who do estimates of wealth gaining, and they're the most commonly referenced, and theirs are usually the most detailed. So those 25 people saw their worth rise a collective $401 billion from 2014 to 2018, and they paid a total of $13.6 billion in federal income taxes to those 5 years. So that's a staggering sum, but it only amounts to a true tax rate of 3.4%, and most normal Americans are paying around 14%. So some of the specific other wealthiest, Warren Buffett, his wealth grew $24.3 billion. He reported, and the income he reported was $125 million. And he paid $23.7 million in taxes. So that's a true tax rate of 0.1%, which is insane. Jeff Bezos, wealth growth of $99 billion. He reported an income of $4.2 billion, paid $973 million. So that's a tax rate of 0.98. Bloomberg, everyone's favorite mayor, when his wealth grew $22.5 billion, he reported $10 billion in income and paid $292 million in taxes, which is only 1.3%. And Elon Musk, wealth grew $13.9 billion, and he reported $1.52 billion in income. So he paid the most with $455 million, which is a true tax rate of 3.27%, still being insanely low and so much lower than the average American. Now, this is ironic also because Warren Buffett is a famous advocate for higher taxes on the wealthy and lower taxes on the rich, but he always advocates for taxes that will not actually affect him very much because he only reports such a small amount of his income. In 2007, Bezos' wealth doubled, increasing $3.8 billion. That year, Bezos and his wife filed that they had gained $48 million in income from dividends and interest, and then he offset all of that from investment losses and a great tax term called other expenses, which can pretty much anything can go in there. And this is common with a lot of the wealthiest. Tons of them have gone like multiple years without paying any income tax. So like in 2011, a year in which Bezos' wealth stayed pretty consistent, he filed on his tax return that he actually lost money, and his income that year was more than offset by investments. And the worst part of that specific year is he even claimed a $4,000 tax credit for his children. And you got to remember, this is Jeff Bezos, who makes like several $1,000s per second. So the fact that he took the $4,000 tax credit just shows how insanely greedy these people are. In the early years, the personal income tax worked as Congress intended. It fell mostly on the richest. In 1918, only 15% of American families owed any income tax, and the top 1% paid 80% of the revenue raised. Later, after legal battles, courts ruled that income derived from proceeds was the only kind that could be taxed. So a person needed to sell an asset like a stock, a bond, or a building, and then reap some money before it could be taxed. So your stocks growing can't be taxed, but you have to sell them. So this kind of is the crux of our tax system and how it keeps wealthy people from paying their fair taxes. So the ProPublica also found that for every $100 of wealth growth over a period, typical Americans will pay $160 in taxes, while for every $100 of wealth growth for Jeff Bezos, he will pay $1.09 in taxes, which again is just a massive difference. So there's a lot of other stuff in the ProPublica article. It goes into a lot more details with a lot of stuff and has a lot of good graphics that show the scale of how little taxes these people pay. So it'll be in the description. I strongly recommend you go and read it. They've done a really good job here demonstrating how the system is set up to keep lower class people in poverty and how it allows the ultra wealthy to avoid paying taxes. So yeah, now transitioning away from the wealthiest people, Philadelphia has had a big week. On the 4th of July, a group of white supremacists numbering around 150 to 200, exact amounts not sure, marched through Philly on the 4th of July. Everyone is assuming it was because the next day First Lady Jill Biden was arriving, but I don't know, it's kind of a weak reason in my mind. The group is known as the Patriot Front, and they marched through center Philly from like the Ben Franklin Parkway across Market, Chestnut, and Walnut Streets before arriving at Penn's Landing. The people of Philadelphia made their feelings quite clear, clashing with the group both physically and verbally, and eventually fascists did what they always do and ran away under the cover of a smoke bomb. They were later stopped and searched by police, but no arrests from police have been reported. Odd. People marched through Philly protesting police brutality, get beaten, gassed, and shot by police and arrested. But these guys are totally fine to march through city on a holiday in masks with shields. It's assumed that some of them were armed. And again, also with them battling citizens in the street. But the police stayed back and just let it play out and waited till they ran away. So this story underlines the importance of always engaging in anti-fascist action in whatever way you can, because at the end of the day, fascists are cowards and babies who will never win in the long run. So, and obviously that doesn't mean like always physically fighting white supremacist groups as they march through the street. There are tons of ways you can engage in anti-fascist action. I'm sure most of you know, you can, like, for your protests, you want to do donations, petitions, write letters to Congress, anything that is going to help push for progressive policies or even just not fascist policies. We're doing anything you can to delay America on its path towards fascism. So yeah, moral of the story, bash fascists, call them mean names because they'll run away like the little babies they are. Now, I want to transition to Afghanistan and U.S. withdrawal from that. It is currently 90% complete, and Biden has moved up the completion date to August 31st from 9/11. So Biden's was pretty decent in his address on Thursday to the public and to press. He's pretty strongly defending his decisions here, which is good. He did have some off takes about how there's no similarities to the war in Afghanistan and Vietnam, which is a little off, but he has been defending how like Taliban making progress demonstrates how America staying there would not make any difference, and how sending another generation of Americans to die in a war that started before they were even born is pointless. He emphasized, and it's correctly important, that will pretty much be the first time Afghanistan has had the opportunity to govern and have its own autonomy. So the Taliban may be an awful group, but this is the first time Afghanistan will have the time and chance to deal with them themselves and how they please. And it's important to note that what we'll probably see is different terrorist groups becoming more political entities as the Afghanistan government has to deal with them on a more political level as they gain more and more power. Not unsimilar to how Hamas is a political entity and is a political party in Israel, as they've gained more and more. They gained more power. They had to actually Israel had to negotiate somehow with them, so they became a actual government and party. So this also signals the next chapter in U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and in the Middle East as a whole, in which we'll see a transition to private military contractors maintaining America's like a dying empire throughout the Middle East. So overall, it's still a really good thing. It signifies the next chapter, and it's great to see at least some level of pointless wars ending in the Middle East. This is all the detail I'm going to go into on this because I'm not knowledgeable as I should be on Afghanistan, mostly because the conflict is literally older than I am and every other pundit on TYV. So my next story, sticking with the Middle East and illegal wars, recently it was announced that Donald Rumsfield had passed away. He is a war criminal and the architect of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He served as the defense secretary for Bush from 2001 to 2006, in which he was the lead designer in the legal wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as being instrumental in the spreading of the lie of Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. The war in Iraq killed hundreds of thousands, including tens of thousands of U.S. military members. The total number of Iraqi civilians' deaths is unknown, but from this point, from U.S. targeted, sanctioned, repeated bombings of their water system, every time they rebuild it, it gets drone striked again. The number is probably upwards of 100,000 right now. So Rumsfield signed on December 2nd, 2002, a document which authorized the use of torture, 20-hour interrogation, use of phobias and stress positions. These and other techniques came to be known as advanced interrogation or torture during the Bush administration. They were later, everyone became pretty obvious that it was torture. It's noted that in the document itself, Rumsfeld wrote a challenge to the 4-hour limit on standing, saying, however, I stand 8 to 10 hours a day. Why is standing limited to 4 hours? Which just shows how much of a demon he is. One, he's a defense secretary. He does not stand 8 to 10 hours a day. It's completely ridiculous. The jobs where you do that are the jobs where you get paid $7 an hour to do a menial task with no breaks, and you don't get a living wage. He is not doing that. If he was pretty old already in 2001 to 2006, he would not have been physically able to stand 8 to 10 hours a day. So that's just ridiculous and shows how evil and cruel he could be. He's definitely one of the most vicious people who have served in the U.S. government, and is directly responsible in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and Afghan people, as well as tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers throughout the last 2 decades. The brutality and atrocities committed in these conflicts is hard to discuss, and it's difficult to put into perspective and make clear how widespread and how brutal U.S. forces were in both conflicts, and how much damage they have caused in the Middle East, probably taking decades to recover. So I'll leave you today with a speech from Iraq war veteran Mike Preisner. Thank you so much for listening. Keep fighting, and remember that better things are possible.
Susan Brothers, thanks everyone for being here. before the organization marched forward. We are here to say to all those serving in the Army, and the Marines, and the Air Force, and the Navy, that you have the absolute right to refuse to take part in these criminal wars, and that's a right that all of you should exercise. You have no reason to go put your life on the line and kill and die for profit. We've been to Iraq, we've been to Afghanistan, and we know what these wars are really about. And we joined the military for many reasons. Because we need a college education, because we need a job, because we need health care. And then we joined the military, and they tell us that our enemies are poor people in caves in Afghanistan, or poor people in the deserts of Iraq. And we've been to those countries, and we know that our enemies are not other poor people abroad. Our enemies are the people that laid us off from our jobs, that denied us health care, that make it impossible to get an education. Our enemies are not in the poorest countries on the planet, but right here in the richest one. The occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan alone are costing over $700 million every single day. This is a crime every single day, while so many of us are hurting. Well, I think all of us here, and the vast majority of people in this country, would agree that we can spend $700 million a day better than bombing people that we have no reason to bomb. We can spend $700 million a day rebuilding those countries we've destroyed. We can spend $700 million a day caring for the veterans we get home when they get home, and then we can spend $700 million a day giving every single person health care, a college education, a job, and a livelihood, and a home. That's what we need to be spending our money on. But this government is not going to do that. They're not going to use the money in that way. They're not going to end the wars. And they're not going to do it because it's not our government. It's their government. It's the government of the rich. It's the government of Wall Street, of the oil giants, of the defense contractors. It's their government, and the only language that they understand is shutting down business as usual. And that's what we're doing here today. And we're going to continue to do until these wars are over. It's crystal clear now that these wars are going to continue and expand and go into other countries. That is the trend. That is what we know, that there is perpetual war, and it's only going to stop if the people stand up and stop it. And that's what we're going to do, sisters and brothers. A lot of people ask me, what do we do? Because we all know things are bad. We all see the atrocities on TV. We read about it. We experience it. People always ask, what do I do? We always want to know what to do. Do we vote? Do we support a politician? Do we join an organization? What do we do? Well, I'll tell you what we do. It's simple. We fight. We fight, and we fight, and we fight, and we shut down our workplaces. We shut down our schools. We shut down the streets. We shut down business as usual, and we fight until we force the people in there to do what the people out here want. Because that's what